Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table. Welcome. You are listening to Money on Tap. It is so good to have you aboard with us today. And you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And today it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce again the folks. Mr. Benjamin, would you say hi? Mr. Benjamin Brayshaw for everybody.
Hey, Seth. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you, Dan Michelon? How are you doing?
I'm feeling great. Enjoying fall and kind of getting into the season of it. So it's exciting times.
It is, yeah. One of my favorite times of year for sure. And actually, my 9-year-old daughter just the other day was telling me that this is her favorite time of year too. So I don't know if there's any other people out there with a hand raised that are like, yes, this is good. But I'm there with you. And today we get to have a lot of fun talking about personal finance. And what does that mean for you? We talk about three-dimensional investing here at Money on Tap. And what Ben and what Dan and what I do here is outside of this podcast or radio show, however you find us, is we're financial planners, part of Brayshaw Financial Group. And the key thing that we want to get across the sound with you today is that you got to have a plan, number one. Putting that together is so critical to be able to develop different concepts and different ideas inside of your retirement planning. But we take a look at all sides of the issues, and that's the three-dimensional aspect of what we're doing here today. And part of what we're going to be doing today is part 2 of our Investing in Energy shows. It's a huge segment of the economy, of the investment world, and there's so many different ways that people can engage or maybe should engage in investing in and around energy, that it's a really fascinating topic that we had to break it into a couple of different shows for you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about energy. I mean, it's something we talk about all the time, every day. I mean, we trade energy. We're constantly involved in it. And, it is really the hub. It is the piece behind our entire infrastructure. It's the piece around what gets food on our tables. It is every part of our day. I mean, if we didn't have energy, we would be living in a third world country. I mean, that's what America would be. It's, if we can't transport stuff, I mean, it is the lifeblood of our world. And I think we don't give energy enough credit. We don't evaluate how it takes care of everything. And today I'm really hoping that this second part of energy in the conversation that we have really drives an awareness of not only where energy plays a role in each and everything that we do, we benefit from, but we understand that there's an investment culture around it, that you have to understand how that works as well and how they're separate but integrated in a certain way.
Well, without further ado, guess what? It is time for Money in the News.
First up for Money in the News today, we've got Americans are buying Teslas, not EVs, but experts say that's about to change. That's a CNBC article that is coming to us on October 26th, 2021 by Michael Wayland. Now, this is kind of an interesting article because we've watched Tesla take a huge spike over the last, few weeks, month. It's been crazy. I mean, it's just gone from, even a few months ago, it was like $500 or $600, and now it's, north of 1,000, approaching 1,100. And by the time someone listens to this, it could be twice that. I have no idea, but people are buying Teslas. Actually recent news even talked about Hertz signing a huge contract. I think, Dan, we were talking about that earlier. There's a couple people that are really engaging Tesla specifically, but the article talks a lot about how electric vehicles, even though Tesla is the front runner, a lot of these companies are going to be kind of, the tail, coming at the end, and how that's actually going to play. And it's not just, see, the thing for me in the investment world piece of this is there's the startup companies that they talk about in this article, but then there's also like GM and Ford and Volkswagen who are really engaging the electric vehicle space pretty heavily. And, I just don't know what that does, honestly, for some of these startup companies. I don't know what your thoughts are, guys, on that.
It was interesting seeing Tesla's kind of recent run. It's a little unrelated to the article, but it was interesting that Tesla actually became larger than Berkshire Hathaway this week, which is approaching $1 trillion company, which is absolutely incredible considering where they've really come from, and the fact that even today EVs make up about 4% of overall auto sales, which is seems to be a relatively small number against expectations, and about 2.6% of the 4 are actually Teslas. So Tesla's done well, obviously, and the stock price reflects that, and they have considerable market share in that space as we speak. But the expectation, the forecasting, predicts that by 2030, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of all auto sales will be EVs.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of the space Tesla really takes up and how large the company is. But then you talk about 4% as EV vehicles make up about 4% of the industry. There's so much room for them to continue to grow, and other, already skilled manufacturers out there, capitalizing on this next phase of the development of this industry.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think looking at oil and talking about energy later on here in the show, looking at the price of oil go up, it makes running a car cost more. So I was, talking to somebody the other day, and it's like if you spend $10,000 more on oil and gas every year because the price of gasoline is $5 or $6 a gallon, well then now an EV car that might cost $10,000 more than a traditional vehicle, well now they're an equal price. And, I think that war with oil, it's intentional. I mean, I don't think it's anything but intentional, but I think it's ultimately to drive. I mean, if it's cheaper to buy an oil and gas vehicle, that's what people are going to buy. I mean, people are cost conscious. And if we don't make them, either the EV vehicles less expensive, or we make gas vehicles more expensive, at the end of the day, U.S. buys things that are less expensive. That's why we manufacture so much stuff in China, right? I mean, that's the crux of it.
Yeah, there's no doubt price will always be the driver, but ever since we started talking about this on the show, there's one article that we referenced a while back that has always captured my imagination, and I think this would certainly be the tipping point. But if you guys remember, there was that mile-long stretch of road in Michigan they were building that would be able to charge an EV car as it drove over. Just imagine that, having a car that you would essentially never need to stop to fuel up. You could drive coast to coast and stay charged. That's got to be 100 years off. I mean, who knows? But, when that day comes, it'll be EV all the way, of course. I mean, there'd be no reason to do anything else.
It reminds me of some of those video games that, you're driving along or whatever your vehicle is, and you ride over the patch that gives you the power to be able to, pass everyone else or something like that. Pretty futuristic stuff. And I do remember that article as well, Dan. It was pretty amazing. Next up is one of my favorites so far this week, which was Kellogg's customer files $5 million lawsuit alleging Pop-Tarts don't have enough strawberries, and that should be worth $5 million, right?
Well, if a cup of coffee burned in your lap at McDonald's gets you $20 million, and that was 15 years ago we heard that story. I mean, then they're going after small potatoes here, but. I mean, there are so many things going on contained in this relatively short article. I mean, right off the top, I mean, if you're going to Pop-Tarts for nutrition, there's probably a beginning of an issue right there. I mean, it can't be good for you. It just can't be.
It reminds me of that Brian Regan Pop-Tart skit. If you haven't seen that thing's hilarious. But nobody thinks that frosty, tasty goodness is driving a health crisis here. I'm not really sure where that is misleading in our community, but they're claiming that there's just not enough strawberry in there, and that there's I think there was pear and something else in there they were claiming was also misleading.
They title it as a frosted strawberry, but it's misleading because there's other fruit in there, which were pear and apples. Apparently, should not be in a strawberry.
I mean, right in the article, right off the back of the box, right, 2% or less is in that ingredient category. Dried strawberries is listed, along with, to your point, pears and apples.
They wanted more of a strawberry taste, though, Dan. I mean, that's worth $5 million.
I mean, it's got to be, and it's hyperinflation at its finest, right there.
Skip going back to the store where you bought it and just trying to get it returned or exchanged for something else. No.
Just when you thought tort reform wasn't necessary and this happens, you're like, absolutely, this is good for us.
Oh man! Oh, I could probably hang out a little longer here, but with the next article and the headline that we have to put out here is our friend, Jack Dorsey weighed in on escalating inflation in the U.S., saying it's going to get considerably worse. Hyperinflation is going to change everything, Dorsey tweeted. Yeah, that was coming to us from CNBC and Jeff Cox.
I got to tell you, I really don't like Jack Dorsey. So I'm just going to tell that out there because I'm sure my bias will come through and I don't want anyone to think I'm hiding something. So, but I do think he might have a point here, and I'm scared and concerned about inflation. I think the things that come out in this article that are, something that every listener needs to be aware is that, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, acknowledged that inflation pressures, quote, are likely to last longer than previously expected, end quote, noting that it can run, quote, well into next year. I think that's the thing that people don't understand is that inflation inflates inflation, right? I mean, at some point in time, everybody's inflating their prices knowing that inflation's coming, but then on top of it, they're still inflating. And they don't stop inflating things until they've already caught up with the inflation that they've already absorbed, right? I think I mentioned this last week. If you're buying, if you sign a steel contract and you're purchasing steel at XYZ and they have to, match that price, but then now the cost of steel is inflated, they're selling it to you potentially at break even or even a loss. Well, they're going to start raising the price of steel and they're going to continue raising that. And when steel levels out in price, they're still going to be inflating, not knowing that they don't want to get caught again having sold a product at break even or a loss. So inflation continues inflation. And that's a big concern for me because we are in a very highly inflated marketplace and we haven't seen anything because people are still absorbing previous costs. But oil and gas, I mean, there's not a person listening to this show that's not paying at least 50% more in gas than a year ago. So we have not seen inflation really hit our pocketbook. But when we know that energy is what's transporting everything across America, that's a big, big problem. And we haven't absorbed the entire inflated market yet. I think we're going to see pricing at a level we've never seen before. Whether it's hyperinflation and Jack Dorsey's right, I'm not sure, but I know it's going to get worse.
Yeah, the latest I think I saw yesterday was, through Janet Yellen saying that now the forecast expects it until late 2022 at the soonest before it begins to abate and get back into the range of the 2% number they're trying to manage to, which is a far stretch from, 6-8 months ago when they were talking about transitory and, how it was really just a seasonal blip. I mean, truth be told, it's obvious to us all now that was never for real, and who knows how accurate it was when it was even stated. But reality's setting in that this is going to be a longer road than we thought.
Well, I think we know that they've constantly. I mean, there's nothing really the government's coming through and being clear about the transparency of future projections because they basically lie until they say, "Oh, well, we were wrong," and now it's this, and that's usually not quite the full story either. I mean, whether you want to talk about Wuhan or some other scenario, you don't quite get the full story until the truth comes out, and then everyone's like, "Oh, well, that's kind of what we meant," or I think inflation's going to be horrible, and they're going to be like, "Yeah, it was transitory, and then we knew it was going to be to 2022, but 2022 comes, and they'd be like, yeah, we're not able to dial it back to the 2% the way we had hoped," and that's really what's going to happen because they're going to raise rates in 2023. They've already told us that. So if you put those two together on top of inflation, you can't raise rates and be absorbing inflation already. I mean, you're get ready. I mean, that's you raise rates and inflation, it's gone.
Well, speaking of transitory, such a great word. I think that's going to do it for us with Money in the News and Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to dive into part 2 of investing in energy. We're going to be talking about, the biggest of the biggest companies out there in these spaces, how to take a look at these and evaluate them and understand different parts of this industry as I think we're going to weave this show together today. That's my word after transitory. We're going to weave some energy in here, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. You're listening to Money on Tap. Hey folks, Seth Kressman, Brayshaw Financial Group is our company, and we bring to you Money on Tap. I say we, that's Ben and I. We have a lot of fun doing this show. And one of the things that we love about doing Money on Tap is that our goal for you to have access to the financial planning world. How do we think? What are we doing? What are we talking about? Raising the bar of your financial education. It's so critical. And that's what we're doing here. The other side of this is as well, we're financial planners. If you are looking to work with a financial planner, if you want to have that playbook for you to understand the important things right now and how you're going to get to your goals or how you're going to retire successfully, that's what we're doing as well. If you have $250,000 of investable assets, give us a call. It's free to you, and it is worth your time to pick up that phone and give us a call and discover what complete wealth management looks like. Ben and I are excited about the opportunity to partner with you and give you that financial plan that's going to make the next step so much better understood and get you where you need to go.
Now back to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And folks, it is a lot of fun to bring a show like this to you today. We're talking about energy, investing in energy, and it's part 2. So if you're wondering what in the world are these guys just jumping into the middle of this topic for, or where are we at exactly in this topic, we're gonna do a little bit of catch up first for you, and also just recommend go back to the last podcast and have a listen to that. And yeah, this is going to be some fun. Dan, do you want to go ahead and tee us up with a little bit of that review?
Yeah, sure. So where we closed out last is talking about how to evaluate energy companies, and this was geared a little bit towards the carbon-based oil and gas companies, but a lot of the same principles apply no matter how you source your energy from an evaluation as an investment perspective. But the 3 points that we referenced before were a strong financial profile. All right, so you want to look at a company that's got, as an indicator, investment grade bond portfolio. They have cash on hand to continue to research and develop and invest in themselves. And they have accessible access to, or low cost access to, additional credit. And so they have a means to, if not only dipping into their own pocket, but access cash in the marketplace when rates are favorable, and allows them to continue to grow and expand and to delve into new fields. The second indicator there was a low cost of operation. In referencing oil specifically, are they able to operate at a $40 barrel was a good marker. Considering where the price has gone, we may not be back there for a while, but if a company could sustain itself and be profitable at that level, it's a great sign for things to come for them. And diversification, which can be geographic in the sense of, well, where do they source their natural resource, but it also could talk about things like, is it upstream, midstream, or downstream? And we covered that last time, but we'll kind of recap that and get back into that a little bit as we specifically talk about the oil companies. So those were three ways to evaluate a company when you're looking at the kind of wide range of options to consider investing, and to try to narrow the field a little bit and pick a couple winners. Hopefully, that's a good way to go about doing it. And then when it comes to the renewable side of the energy coin here, which includes things like wind, hydropower, biomass, ocean and geothermal sourcing of energy, some of the pros there that we looked at were, that they're eco-friendly, right? So that's the whole point, right? So less damage to the environment. They're renewable in that the resource is out there. They don't have to dig for it and find it. It's, theoretically just comes to the collector, right? It could stabilize global prices. That would be an important thing. Less competition, more predictability in cost. It has a great boost for public health, right? So a lot of ancillary benefits that people choose to invest in and make a lot of sense for the global outlook long term, right? And it is a technology, so we can expect that it will improve over time. The way this energy is collected and generated and shipped, it's all driven by technology. And what anything based in technology tells us is that over time it becomes more efficient, less expensive, easier to manage and to use. And they can be used to recycle waste, right? Biomass is a great example of that. So we can use our waste to actually produce more energy. And then less reliance on foreign sources. So getting back into kind of the geopolitical realm and some of the things we have to deal with from an OPEC perspective and some of the tough times we've had in the 70s and 80s and dealing with those guys, less reliance on foreign powers who may not be globally aligned with where we're at politically is always a good thing. And some of the cons, though, the other side of the story is that generally low efficiency levels, right? It's expensive to produce. It's expensive to ship. Upfront capital costs are tremendous, right? So to get started in that industry takes a lot of upfront money. There's a lot of specialty to install, so the equipment's all new and not easy to obtain and not necessarily easy to use at all. And it's expensive storage costs. That's another downside here is once the energy is produced, if it isn't immediately used, how do you store it? Where do you store it? How do you make it deliverable? And the solution is not always commercially viable, right? Sometimes it's just simply too expensive if conditions aren't right to become a primary source of energy for any of our economy. In the end, it still does make pollution, right? So you hear that catchphrase all the time to get to net zero. Well, even these renewable green sources do produce pollution. And so that issue isn't entirely eliminated just because we opt to go green.
Dan, there's a lot in there, and we went through this, pretty in depth, last week. So there's a lot to that, and I'm sure people have questions who might just be joining us. And I would say, go back, listen to last week's show. But there's so much inside the energy conversation that list isn't even the entire gamut of all the items that we looked at a bunch of lists. When we do our show research and we bring a bunch of different things and compile them together and look at stuff and so forth and remove things that we think are just too detailed and we get rid of things that might be too fluffy. But our whole goal is that, you are more well-educated in energy and the way to move forward in an investment style with energy and what's relevant. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things. Some are going to be kind of very high level at the end. We're going to talk about some things that might scare people in the energy space. It might be words that people aren't excited to hear. But, when we talk about investments and we talk about specifically energy, we mentioned the three things to look for and how to analyze, for instance, oil stocks. But they would potentially apply in different variances to even the green energy space. And when we talked about the oil stocks, we talked about looking for a strong financial profile. That's like with a company with an investment bond rating, significant amounts of cash, low cost operations, and diversification. Where are these oil companies located? Where are they drilling? Where are they getting their oil? I would tell you, and some of the things that we think about when it comes to clean energy and investing, I take that same concept and I would say, you want somebody who has a strong presence in the clean energy space, someone who knows what they're doing, somebody who already has infrastructure and has revenue. When it comes to the idea when oil, you say low cost of operations, it's kind of laughable, right, in the green energy space because there is just an astronomical upfront cost to getting operations even going. I mean, it's not like, these are, you drill a oil well, yeah, you've got some upfront costs and, you tap it into a pipeline and all the infrastructure's there. And we spent, hundreds of years like developing all of this, right? But the truth is we haven't. We're on the front edge of development. We're crossing a new frontier when we think about what these green energy pieces need. And you mentioned just getting the infrastructure to get that energy to where it needs to go, and then the storage of it. This is an infrastructure frontier items that we have never crossed. No man has gone before, right? I mean, the Star Trek, idea. We need to build all of that. It's just on the infantile. 10 years ago, you drive along the highway, you would never see a solar field. You drive by highways, you almost see solar fields all the time now, right? People don't want to live next to a highway, but the land's fairly cheap and there's not a lot of trees because the highway, they've cleared them all and you've got solar fields all there. So it's just interesting how they're building this infrastructure. There's companies like Brookfield. We're going to talk about them in a little while. I mean, they have bought all of basically all the hydro energy out of Maine. I mean, they just own an ungodly amount of hydro energy throughout our country. And they're not stopping their purchase power inside the clean energy space. So low cost of operations might be applicable to an oil company, but it's not applicable to a green energy company who's trying to evaluate it. But what I would say is that you need somebody with deep pockets who can build that infrastructure, get the lending power to build it, and so forth, because you don't want to invest in a company that isn't big. They're just a little startup. They might get lending power. They might, it could all work out, but in reality, in the green energy space, you need the big boys to be the ones to invest with. You want to look at their market cap, look at their cash flow, look at their ability to build things out. That's going to be important.
You definitely touched on a couple of things there, Ben, that might be getting a little bit ahead of the rest of the show here. But when we talk about diversification, right, there's models of diversification, and so often that's an idea that different people have around different stuff, and that's generally to say, for instance, somebody might try to make an argument that the S&P 500 index is a diversified model to be investing in because there's 500 different companies in there that index is based off of, and we might say something different to that, like there's all sorts of other ways to invest where you can get a better model of diversification. But how do we apply that in terms of energy when we're taking a look at these companies that are technically green energy or other kinds of energy, the traditional oil and gas companies out there? And that diversification to me means that not only do they have a diversification, that's a good word. I'll try to say that a bunch today. Diversification around, the location of, let's say if it's oil, right? They've got many, many different places that they're able to pull that out of and different methods that they're able to use. And, they've got the upstream, the downstream, the midstream. But there's also, when we start to see this green energy conversation, like you said, the bigger companies out there that are in that sector of the energy are usually, our favorites, I'd say, are usually in some kind of a process of becoming big players in that green energy place, kind of becoming that more of that net zero of that target for them as well. And to do that, a lot of the time they are, investing heavily in the green space. And when you start looking at how they're doing things and what they're doing, it's a good indication for us to start to, it's a good thing for us to take a look at as well. How do we do that as well?
You talk about diversification, and I think, you're right on, Seth. I mean, there's a couple of things when I think of diversification and clean energy that I really get engaged with very quickly. And one is that you're not just doing one type of green energy, right? I mentioned Brookfield earlier. I mean, they're doing wind, they're doing solar, they're doing hydro. A lot of these companies are looking at multi-engagements because, truth be told, we have wind farms that sometimes don't have wind. We have solar farms that have too much overcast and aren't collecting enough solar. And these companies, they thrive and they make money by selling energy. And if they are just in solar and they happen to be, as you mentioned, in just one location that happens to be overcast for that 6-month period, just the way, I mean, I look at our summer. My summer was rain, right, Dan? I mean, we just had so much rain here in New Hampshire, and solar had to be down for the summer because it was constantly raining. I think it rained like 25 out of 30 days or something in July. It was just crazy. And so with that concept, diversification, I think you're right. I mean, we're talking about location just like oil would, but we're also talking about types of energy, right? It's not, oil is very predictable. Like they have a good idea of how much oil is in the ground. They have all sorts of geology and schematics, and they can X-ray or whatever, seismology or whatever it's called. I've seen these charts, right? I don't even know the names of them, but they know there's a reasonable amount of liquid in the ground. They're not sure if it's all oil, but they can tell you that they know approximately percentage-wise a range, and that's why they drill in certain areas in certain fields. So it's just interesting to me that that's a predictable item, but we have so many unpredictable items inside clean energy that if you're not diversified in the types of clean energy, you've got a real vulnerability spot in that company in an investment side.
Folks, you're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And we're talking about investing in energy, all types of energy. And we're going to start talking about some of the companies that are kind of the big players out there, and how are they doing what they do, and what are we evaluating around these companies. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to listen to Money on Tap.
Call us today at 855-226-8551 and get your free consultation with Ben Brayshaw or Seth Crossman or any one of our partners, and find out what's going on in your plan, your estate plan, your financial plan, or what you're planning at all, if nothing. Get it fixed, get it right, get it done today. Give us a call at 855-226-8551.
Now back to Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And we are talking about energy today and investing in energy. And Ben, I think it's time to pass the mic to you, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Well, we're talking about diversification of energy, and I think we all know, that's a piece that's important on a number of levels. Specifically in green energy, it's highly important in the types of green energy. One of the things that concerns me about a lot of the energy plays. I mean, you've got wind, you got solar, you got hydro, you got biomass. Dan mentioned you've got basically ocean, which takes advantage of the tides. I mean, there's just so many different things. I don't think the tides are going to end, but I don't know how much energy they get from it. And then geothermal, right? And these companies are really, wind and solar and hydro seem to be the ones that are the most utilized. On the public scale that we're all probably the most familiar with. Some of the other ones, biomass and stuff like that, that's not an everyday conversation inside everyone's household. But I think breaking down the diversification of these companies is really, really important in anyone's evaluation of a stock or a company to invest in. And, as we break into each one of these things, there's all sorts of downsides, right? Because when you start looking at a company that's well diversified, now you have to look at how each of the companies is performing in those diversifications. So how is their wind performing in an electric scenario? What kind of electricity are you doing? The other piece of it that's really bizarre is when we talk about energy, right, that the scope of the conversation is we might be talking about Exxon or Chevron or any number of these companies, but you start talking about Nextra Energy or Duke or the Southern Company or Exelon or any of these things, you start getting into utilities, but it's all gearing into that energy conversation and how it's all going to come to play inside an investment piece, right? Do you want to own the oil in the ground, or do you want to own the energy company? And that starts getting into an entire diversification piece too, because Seth, you mentioned upstream, midstream, downstream. We all been talking about that. And when we talk about that on, the oil scale, right? That midstream conversation, those are just the, basically all the pipelines, right? We're talking about pipelines. We're not talking about anybody who's drilling or anybody who's refining. The midstream is just moving the oil from point A well to point B, refining company. And then you have other midstream items, which is just trucking, right? We're trucking gasoline all over the country. And so there's just a lot of different pieces to energy and how you want to be in it, and also how you want to look at it. I mean, we talked last week about $90 barrel oil. We got close. We hit 84, 85 and change. And we're in the 80s right now as we speak. And are we going to hit $90 or $100 barrel? I honestly think we might go much higher than that. I think we might be seeing $120 barrel oil. I mean, it really depends. I will say that we've seen a crushing defeat, in Europe. We talked about that last week as well, that, they're paying like 700% more for electricity than they were 10 years ago. I mean, that's a ridiculous increase. Can you imagine if your electric bill at your home went up 700% over the next 10 years? But we may be looking at that. I mean, everything inside our world is changing, from the environment to how look at California, look at all the fires, look at the droughts. You're not running hydro in California right now. I mean, if you have a hydro farm in California, you're probably suffering, but if you have solar, well, that sounds great. But if you have a ton of fires creating smoke, I mean, how much solar are you getting out of those things? You're probably not maximizing. So there's a lot of different variables inside clean energy that creates a complication. And honestly, Europe has discovered that no matter what, they still need fossil fuels to run, as much as they're creating rigidity about using fossil fuels. Well, what happened inside that conversation is that Russia, who provided a ton of the fossil fuels, started diverting them to Asia, saying, well, if you're not buying our fossil fuels, we're going to build infrastructure around getting it to Asia more. Now they need the fossil fuels, and that infrastructure is waning what they need. It's a scary mix, honestly, to think that we're going to go completely dependent on clean energy, something that I'm highly worried about.
Yeah, it's clear that we're not there yet. I mean, right now it's accounting for maybe 25% of our electricity demand, and that's a wide gap to try and satisfy in the near term with renewables. It's just, as an industry, it just isn't there yet. It's not able to provide for all that we need. So the notion that we can, from a kind of a ethical, moral, political standpoint, just drop the hammer and cut the cord and convert over to green energy, it's a fallacy. It's just simply not possible. But we talked a lot about kind of diversity, within these companies of, different types of green energy. Are they covering all bases? Do they generate electricity from all the different means? And does that diversification make it potentially a better investment to consider? Kind of on the other end of the scale, there's some companies out there that do some pretty interesting things that are very specified, right? So, they'll do one thing and try and do it well, and have that become the driver of their worth as an investment, because they do capture a lot of market share in the specific thing. And one of those companies is Solar Edge Technologies, that was referenced in the article that by Matthew DeLeo that we were looking at here out of Fool.com. It was pretty interesting, and I don't know a lot about solar, but what this company does do is they develop and manufacture optimized inverter systems, which is just a technique and a tool that they use to generate more energy out of each solar panel. So it's a very specific thing that they do, but they are by far and away the leader in that space. And as solar fields grow and become a more dependent upon part of our energy infrastructure, to have a company that really does specialize and provide this very needed thing to a growing base of solar users is an interesting opportunity in of itself. I mean, it's delivered nearly a 50% annualized return since its IPO, making it up from the 10th largest supplier from 2014. So they've been on a great growth track. They do one thing, they do it well, and they've become a critical piece of the infrastructure there in the solar world. And that's another way to evaluate an investment and take a look at a company and judge it on its merits as a potential investment is, they do that one thing, they provide that one critical piece, but everybody in this growing industry is dependent upon them to provide that.
One of the things I just need to jump in and say, just because, for one, we're referencing some articles here, and we're talking about some specific companies and what they do. And it's stuff that we like and we're excited about. But at the end of this, segment or whatever it is that we're talking about right now, let's be really, really clear. There's no way a recommendation happening here, because these are individual companies that are public and you can buy or trade them. And, just because we happen to talk about what we're talking about today, you really have to take a look at what your investments are, what's appropriate for you, and running. Hopefully this is not the way that you invest, is just grab our information from the show and just go out and start buying stuff. I've talked to people that do that with Kramer, but you know what? Kramer's, he's not licensed like we are anymore. We just want to make sure that everybody that we're working with understands that right now, this is the fun stuff. Let's have a conversation about it and come in. Talk with us. Let's take a look and see what you're doing right now and see if some of the stuff that we're talking about today would make sense for you.
Thanks for saying that, Seth. I think that's important to clarify on a couple levels, because there are a lot of companies out there that we do like, a lot of companies that we do own, and we are heavily invested in the energy sector. I really do encourage a lot of people that when they're looking at energy or types of energies, to create diversification. ETFs are a phenomenal way to look at energy itself. It gives you diversification. You've got managers behind that are looking at the individual stocks, and it gives you some real exposure. And they're evaluating that stuff. They're looking at these companies and they're doing diversification, and they're trying to evaluate, hey, these are the opportunities that we think are the better of the options and choices out there. And I always tell people, it's like ETFs, even some mutual funds that might be energy focused. That might be a better way to get you the diversification you need, especially if you don't have a lot of money to invest and you think energy is something you want to consider. But at the same time, energy has skyrocketed significantly over the last, even 3 to 4 months, more so than just kind of the recovery period over the last year from COVID. And so you have to really be very careful even getting into energy right now. And I think the conversation we're kind of like leading into is that there's probably a long-term play in energy, specifically clean energy maybe, for people as they're looking towards the development and infrastructure, whether it's, the conversation about solar ETFs and all the different things that are happening out there, right? So the conversation I think we're having more so is, what does the long range 10, 20, 30-year investable scenario look like for energy, and how maybe you look at that versus what am I going to do in the next 3 to 6 months? Because the next 3 to 6 months, we could have, if COVID version 4.0 hits or something like that, and we shut down as a country again and something like that, right? Energy is going to crash. It's going to crash again. And you don't want to be held out there. So what we're really talking about is long range, clean energy initiatives and what that investment scenario looks like.
Folks, you're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. We're talking about energy, investing in energy, and we're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
It's well understood that Social Security is on the chopping block for our future. But on this Cliff Notes edition of Money on Tap, Ben, Dan, and Seth look at an even greater concern over the fate of pensions.
It's the pension system that's horrible. If you haven't listened to our pension show, you should go back and listen to that, because that system's not only broken, but no one's paying into it anymore either, really. And Social Security people are paying into it, and it's crashing and burning.
And just to quantify what that drop-off may look like, they take an average Social Security earner who brings in $1,500 a month or $18,500 a year off of the Social Security program. They would be looking at a $90,000 deficit over a 20-year retirement. That's a big gap to cover.
And people who have pension buyout offers, those are things you really need to seriously sit down with somebody that knows what they're talking about. People who are collecting over $3,000 in their pension in retirement with the 2014 Obama Pension Reform Act, Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, their pensions were cut down, I think, $1,700 or $1,800, right, Seth? I mean, when we did that show, it was a hurtful, massive cut.
Really, it was what was happening to people that were fully retired and not capable of returning to the workforce, and their income being cut, in over half. And it wasn't like a sizable, significant income by any measure. And, how do you tell them? Sorry.
Thanks for joining us for this Cliff Notes edition of Money on Tap, with great tips from the pros in three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. Now here's more Money on Tap with Ben, Seth, and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. And we're going to be talking we're going to talk all energy today. That's it. Pure energy today. And we're going to probably run out of time if we just don't jump in and get going. So, Ben, you had kind of a last edition that I thought was awesome. Could you please jump into that?
Well, before I jump into that, so we have an article here with which is from The Fool again. It's investing in renewable energy stocks, and I think this is one of the things that I find tremendously interesting. And we talk about why invest in clean energy. That's actually a statement inside this article, which is from Matthew DeLallo. This is September 13th, 2021. So it's not too old, but the concept of it is that he says climate change is forcing companies and other institutions to focus on how they can do their part to decarbonize. Many companies are signing power purchase agreements, what we call PPAs, with electric utilities. Now, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, that kind of that midstream concept with oil and gas. Like, we have these pipelines out there. We have truckers who are moving oil, moving gasoline, moving diesel throughout the country. But these PPAs are basically the midstream pieces that they're putting together for the clean energy. And, I think when we start getting into that, there's a lot of companies that are really getting specific about this stuff. And this infrastructure is key. These utility companies, they want the energy, they're looking to do it, and there's basically 5 companies that are really engaging this. Brookfield, I mentioned earlier, was one of them. Clearway Energy was another. First Solar, Nextra Energy, and Solar Edge Technology. I think Dan mentioned that. Now, I'm not saying that we should buy any of these. Actually, I probably wouldn't buy any of these right now. They're super high. You need to really look. If you're saying, hey, I want to get into one of these companies, I would say don't buy it. I would wait for an opportunity that looks more presentable than today even. But all in all, these PPAs are extremely crucial and critical to the long-term viability of these companies and shooting out that energy to the utility companies. I don't know, Dan, if you have anything to add to that, but this is a key component.
Yeah, I think it's one of the challenges that a lot of these green energy companies have coming up, and as they get going is, so they developed the technology to produce it, they've built the equipment, but how do they get it to the actual distribution phase, right? How do they have the energy, they can't store it, they can't sell it, they can't really use it in any kind of meaningful way without these partnerships with the utility companies. And that's the key piece. That's the access to the end user. That's where dollars change hands. That's where profitability occurs, right? So looking for companies in the evaluation phase that are ahead of the game in that and have established relationships with utilities, that's a critical piece to it. Like we talked about the midstream, upstream, downstream. In the oil business, that is well established and has been invested in and built out for 100 years. But in the green energy system here, those partnerships are critical. You got to find people who have access to the utility companies themselves.
I think to add to all of that, Dan, and what you're talking about is not only do we have an issue with getting it to the companies, the storage, as you mentioned, is huge. Lithium batteries, we can't even produce those things in the United States. The toxicity of the production of those things aren't even allowed in North America. I mean, so we harvest lithium and we send it out to other countries and let them, make it into the batteries it needs to be, it's super toxic and something that's not going to be a long-term solution. I mean, that's why all these companies are looking for other battery sources that are cleaner to make, because each one of these clean energy items has a real problem. I think the other piece that get people going is the idea that, and I think this is what's coming down the road, and it's just a matter of time, and they're already involved in it and so forth, but it's the idea and the concept of clean nuclear. And when we talk about nuclear power, I mean, everyone who talks about clean energy is going to have a heart attack when they start realizing that, maybe nuclear is the way we're going to go as a country or as a globe in trying to mitigate a lot of this energy crisis that we end up having. And people are like, energy crisis. The idea that we already use more and more fossil fuels every year, year over year over year, even with the development of the clean energy. I mean, we used less oil during the COVID period, but that was just because we shut everything down. I mean, it's not because we weren't using it, so that's one item. The other thing is I hear a lot of conversation about hydrogen. I mean, hydropower, like, how is hydrogen energy going to be our future? I like the idea of hydrogen energy and how that can potentially play into it, but there's a lot of pros and cons to that. And, the idea that people don't realize it takes fossil fuels, and it takes a lot of it to drive out the hydrogen to get the energy from it. The second piece about it is that, it's extremely, extremely explosive. I mean, it's wonderfully eco-friendly, and there's all those great conversations about it, but a lot of people don't know that it's extremely hard to store. It's expensive because it requires the fossil fuels, and the flammability is scary. I mean, it's a problem. So I like how everyone's going and talking about clean energy, and I like the idea of hydrogen, but I really think that the end solution ends up becoming, basically clean nuclear. How's that for a bombshell in clean energy?
Nuclear and bombs so close together, huh? Jeez. It is amazing, though, that, it's just an ever-changing field, right? It's one of those things that you got to keep your eyes on, and, whether you're just a user of energy like we all are, or an investor in energy like some of us are, and many more of us will be in the future, it's just such a thing that we're so dependent on that you just really have to keep yourself abreast of the news and see what changes are ahead, because it's an ever-changing field.
Yeah, and I think before we kind of leave the show as we tie up here too, it's constantly evolving, and honestly, we're only one breakthrough away from all of us being wrong on this show, right? We're like, there's some discovery about to happen in something that's going to be like, wow, there's a whole new renewable energy source. No one realized how wonderful it is, and it could be grinding sand out of the desert for all we know, who knows? But what we do know is that fossil fuels are here to stay for the foreseeable future, because it takes fossil fuels to make all of the green energy, and it usually takes fossil fuels to drive most of the green energy.
Yeah, some of the takeaways I have when we take a look at all of these pieces is it's really fascinating to see that energy companies are the leaders in these technologies that we kind of take for granted on a daily basis. Like, who would think that the largest green energy company out there is Tesla? Because it's not what I associate with green energy is Tesla, or some of the other things that Tesla is creating in like solar panels that are like roof tiles that you can put on your roof that looks just looks like a roof, but each tile is a solar panel, and things like that. It's just the trans there's a trans word there for this, but it translates from one place to another, and it really does move not only just from energy but across the board into all these other sectors. And it's pretty amazing stuff. If you're looking through and finding more information here, one will lead to the next, and a lot of cooperation between these programs or these companies like ConocoPhillips and Chevron, I believe, share some joint venture stuff, but they all seem to not necessarily help each other out, but there's a lot of stuff crossing over and lines being crossed among them as well.
Great points. Really great points.
Folks, that's going to do it for our Energy Talk today. Give us a call at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com. We'd love to be able to sit down with you, take a look at what you're doing, and see how energy can be a part of your planning and your investing in the future. You've been listening to Money on Tap. Make it a great week.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of SagePoint Financial. SagePoint Financial and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire, 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.